Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me here. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm sorry that I don't speak Japanese, and I'm afraid English maybe will be too quick, but we'll see how we do, and you can raise your hand in the back if you need me to slow down a little bit or clarify something. I'm happy to do that. Once I start talking, I sort of forget about what I'm doing, so just let me know, and we'll see how we do together. Thank you. Okay, so I was interested in learning analytics. I come from a psychology background. I've been studying how learning happens for a very long time. And partly, there was a kind of a revolution right about the time that I was a graduate student, where we really started thinking about learning as less than, not something that was done to students, not information put into students' heads, but really a method of interaction with people and with the things in the world around us. Context matters. And so, as technology has become more pervasive in education, we need to think about how we can leverage this technology and how can we understand learning better because of the big data that we have, and how can we think about changing the practices of teaching so that we can help more learners to be successful and not fall asleep in the classroom when we're lecturing them. So today I would like to talk to you about several things. I was asked to give a little bit of information about who SOLAR is. This is a Society for Research on Learning Analytics Research. So I'll tell you a little bit about that community. I was asked to give some basics about learning analytics. I apologize if you're not all newcomers to learning analytics, but I'll give you just some basics. And then I'll tell you some of the ways that we're using learning analytics on my campus at Michigan. And then just leave you with some thinking about where are we going with this. So first I'll present the basic definition of learning analytics that has been adopted by SOLAR. And there are a couple of important points that I think about this definition. And one is this word here, context. So we're thinking about learners in the situation that they're in, and not assuming that school is just school and university is just university, and it's all the same. We want to both understand learning, so we want to enrich our theories of learning and come to know better how students are learning, and optimize learning. Right, so that more students can be successful learners in the environments in which they occur. And the idea for me here is action, that we're using this data in service of something, that we're not just collecting data to build models, or we're not just collecting the data to write fancy academic papers, but we're actually turning that data into interventions and prescriptions and other ways that we can affect what happens in the classroom and outside of it. So SOLAR is very much an international research community. It's one of the most international academic societies that I belong to, and I'm happy to be here because we would like to have more members from Japan and more research from Japan presented at our conferences. So I invite you to find out more about it and join us. We have an annual conference. Once a year we run the LAC conference. Learning Analytics and Knowledge. It was just in Sydney this past March, and it's coming up in Phoenix, Arizona in the US next March. And what we like to do with SOLAR, because we are international, is to move the conference around the globe. We were very thrilled to be in Sydney this past year because we haven't been this far east before. We've been in Europe and Vancouver in Canada and a couple places in the US. So we like to move it around so that we get it's easier for different people to come. We also run a Learning Analytics Summer Institute, which we just finished last week, which was held this year at Teachers College in New York in the United States. And the thing that I'll note here for you is that many PhD students like to come to the Summer Institute to learn about learning analytics, and Solar has scholarship money that helps support the students financially to be able to come to this meeting. So if you're an academic who has some PhD students and you're thinking maybe you want to send them to Lassie, don't think that it will be too expensive from Japan. Whether we can pay the full cost or not depends on how many students each year and from where they're coming, but we try to cover as much of their expenses as we can because we see the students as a way to grow the society as well. And finally, we have a journal. It's relatively new, 3 or 4 years, the Journal of Learning Analytics, and I invite you to look at that journal to see some of the research that we're doing that's featured in the journal. As I said, we're a very international community, and this is a graph taken from the Sydney conference. So you can see there's a big dot here because when you hold a conference in a country, lots of people from that country come. But the lines between the dots show you papers that were jointly authored by academics from different countries. And so it's not just that Australians publish with Australians and North Americans publish with North American, but the lines indicate when these research groups are truly international. So you'll find in our proceedings lots of authors with titles from different institutions. Just to give you an idea about some of the topics that are presented here, this is again taken from all of the presentations at the Sydney conference, and the size of the square suggests that how many papers. So, we had a lot of papers on data mining, educational data mining, machine learning and modeling, some stats, lots of stats stuff. And then some down here, some of the smaller topics, multimodal interaction, where the data is coming not just from an LMS, but from sensors or other ways, eye tracking, other sorts of things. Network analysis, looking at when learners are interacting with other learners and so forth. But basically you can see that in addition to being an international society, we're very much a multidisciplinary and a multi-methodology community. So I think one of the things that I really enjoy about learning analytics is that there's a way into learning analytics for many people to bring their expertise to apply to this area. We are a very successful conference for a relatively new society, and our proceedings are published proceedings. So they're available online, they're open after the fact. And we're very proud of the fact that these are journals, that learning and education journals. They're ranked by citation and analysis, and we're already number 8. We're the 8th most cited source for work in this area, which is pretty quick for a relatively new conference and new society. So that was just a bit about solar. I'm happy to tell you more about it later if you like, give you more details. You can be an individual member of the society. You can, your institution can get an institutional membership. The information about both of those is available on the website. Okay, so let's talk about learning analytics. And why is it new, or where did it come from? Because we've been collecting data on students and learners for a very long time. Right? So that part's not new. But what is new is theories of learning. As I said, we're not just open head insert information anymore. We're thinking about learning as a much more complex activity. And we have theories and are building discussions about the nature of that learning. Pedagogy is changing. More and more technology is involved in the classroom than ever before. So that's new. And then we have all these new sources of data. And when I started studying learning, I had videotape data and whatever little tutoring environment, I was using, maybe collected some data from students. But now with the use of LMS and other forms of digital media, and electronic textbooks, and so forth, there's just more and more data about what students are doing and what instructors are doing at a very, very fine level of analysis. So that's really where the opportunity comes in. And when I think about learning analytics, I think about this data-rich environment. That what we've got here is a collection of evidence about learning and how it's unfolding for each student in every class. And you have these records of activity. As I said, and more people are adding other kinds of data, sensor data, eye tracking, what books the students are using from the library, what things they've opened and read on the course website or in the library holdings. But also, we have a lot more evidence of products of learning, right? We used to just have an exam, maybe a homework assignment, maybe a quiz, but now we have these very rich environments of discussion posts and blogs and tweets. Students are using hashtags and so forth. And so we have a lot more evidence of what the students are producing in the course of their learning that gives us new opportunities for assessing what they know and how deeply they know. So learning analytics then relies on data from a number of different sources. And of course, the ones that we've used for a very, very long time to grade their grades. We give a student a grade for the class, we give them an A if they do very well, or a B, or a C, or a D. And the records might tell us which classes they took and when they took them. So we still have all that. Of course, universities have been collecting that for a long time. But we also have, as I said, more written evidence of learning. More of those are digital, and even when they're not, you can scan them and you can do natural language processing on them. That technology is getting better as well. And we have this kind of timeline for the learning. We know what they opened first and when did they open it. And when did they turn it in? And did the students who turned it in earlier do better than the students who waited to the last minute to turn it in? And so forth. So there's a lot of richness that you can infer from these records of what the students are doing. And this data then lives in your university's warehouse, perhaps your data warehouse, and then vendor tools. Often your universities are contracting with vendors for certain kinds of tools. Now, I will say my soapbox is, I always say, don't sign a contract with a vendor who won't give you your data, right? Because then they have the data and you don't have it, and then you rely on them to tell you what that data means. And it doesn't allow you then to link your data that you hold institutionally up with the data that they're collecting on your students, so you can't really line those things up and make these richer analysis. So that's a little caveat. Now, as I showed you from the slide of our conference, there are lots of different methodologies that we use in learning analytics because there are different kinds of questions that you can ask with these different methodologies. And this just gives you some example of research questions that might be more appropriate for one type of analytic method versus another, and different kinds of questions that you can ask and hopefully answer depending on the technique that you're using. So that's just some examples for you. I don't want to read the slide, but I hope. And then there are lots of things you can do with the data, which for me, as I said earlier, is really the most exciting part of learning analytics. And I said it's supposed to be actionable, right? So can you predict student success? And what's the point of that, right? The point of that is not so that you can tell the student to go away because the model shows that there's no way they're going to succeed. But so you can say, this student is in trouble, what can I do to ultimately make the outcome be different than the model suggests it would be? And so you can identify opportunities for intervention. So take a look at the student, looks like they're on a course to fail. Why, and what can we do at this point in time and the next point in time to change that course? You can use it to determine what a learner does and doesn't know, something perhaps beyond just what grade they got on a particular exam. You can monitor their behavior and engagement level. So a student comes to you and says, I worked really hard, I don't understand why I didn't do well on this exam. You could look at the data and say, well, you didn't do any of the practice quizzes, or you didn't hand in any of the homework. Now, you might know that otherwise as an instructor, but that depends on how you teach and how many students you have in your class and what data do you have available. But the monitoring is not in a big brother kind of way, but in a way that says, I need to understand what you're doing and what you're not doing, so that I can help you to understand that better. And sometimes students just aren't well calibrated to what they should be doing. So they might come to the instructor and say, I studied really hard for this test. I don't know why I didn't get a good grade. And then you say, well, so like, how many hours do you think you studied for this test? And the student might say something like, oh, it took me like, I had to study like maybe five or 6 hours for this test. And you say to them, but the A student studied for 10 to 15 hours for this test. And the student just doesn't know that that wasn't enough time, right? So, and it is typical that students who aren't doing well, they're not doing well because they don't know how to be good students, right? And so we have to give them this kind of feedback so that they can understand how they need to change what they're doing. And that leads to this next point about personalizing the learning process. Everybody is not the same. They don't come into the classroom exactly the same. They won't leave exactly the same. So we have to figure out for this individual student what needs to happen and how can we help. Instructors can refine content. Often instructors will have lots of resources available for their students and not have any idea which ones the students are using. So you put up a study guide, and you have 3 extra readings you're thinking that they might be useful. And then you don't know, did anybody read them? Did the students who did better, are they the ones who read them than the students who didn't? So we really need to help instructors understand more about how they're constructing their courses and how that has a relationship to student performance in those courses. Measure student improvement beyond test scores. So there are lots of ways potentially to grade students besides just using standardized exams, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And ultimately for institutions, the bottom line is often student retention and completion. So that means our students staying at your university, they come for the first year, do they turn up for the second year? They put in 2 years, did they stick around and graduate? And that's what the completion is. How many of your students who start in the first year end up with a degree at the end of the year? How can we change those numbers so that we have more students be successful? So when we think about learning analytics at my university, it really is trying to think about not thinking of education as this kind of factory model, which really was pervasive back from, I mean, you think about cars and assembly lines, right? We'll just put the students in the classroom and we'll give them all the same thing, and then they'll all come out knowing what they need to know, and that's just not how it works. So one of the things that I think is a hallmark of the actionable research that we do in learning analytics is very much in this circle. Right, so you start with data. We've been talking a lot about data. Data to knowledge. So the data helps you know something. Well, that knowledge then leads to practice or changes in practice. And then when you implement those changes in the practice, you're generating more data. right? Which goes back up to here. And so really what you're doing is creating a data-driven pathway to success by iterating through this cycle. And not just assuming that once you've collected the data and it tells you something about the student that you're done, and not just that when you've implemented those changes in the classroom you're done, because you really want to know what effect that had and help use that to refine the model of what you're doing next. So I'll tell you a little bit about my institution, the University of Michigan. Who knows where Michigan is in the United States? Anyone? Yeah, some are. You know where people someone's from Michigan when they do this? Because we're the state that looks like a mitten and is surrounded by water. Actually, we have two peninsulas. There's an upper peninsula, but not much happens up there. And Ann Arbor is here in the mitten of Michigan. So I'll tell you a little bit about how we got started doing learning analytics at my university, some of the reasons why I think it really kind of took hold in an institutional way, and then some of the things that we're doing with, I'll give you some examples of those. So first, for those of you who didn't even know about the mitten, I just wanted to make sure you understand the kind of institution I am, because as I said, context matters, right? So we're about 200 years old. The university is comprised of 19 schools and colleges. My school, the School of Information, is one of those schools. It's the second smallest school on our campus. We have 6,800 faculty, 29,000 undergrads, and we have lots of postgraduates as well. And we offer over 9,000 courses on our campus. And 110 of those courses are huge. They have more than 200 students enrolled, and they can have as many as 2,000 students enrolled in a course. So it's a very big university by American standards. It's a public university, and it's very competitive admission. So our students tend to be generally very good students when they walk in the door, but that doesn't mean they are all good students or that many of them couldn't be better students. But the context for the learning analytics research on our campus isn't so much about retention and completion, because we do very well at that because we're getting such competitive students. We don't tend to lose many students from freshman year to graduation. So I've been thinking about learning analytics for a long time, starting back even in 2005, helping develop an online system for tracking PhD student progress, mostly for the students, because they were worried that the day would come and they would give their dissertation defense and they would think they're done, and somebody might say, oh, but you forgot to do this or you skipped a step. So we started tracking progress then. I think a lot of my analytics work came right around 2009, when we were a school that adopted, helped develop the software called Sakai, the learning management system Sakai, and I was asked to direct the lab of the people who were helping the users with Sakai and helping instructors use it better and thinking about the design aspects of it. And that's when I realized the treasure trove of data that we had from this system. And just thinking about every click that an instructor did and a student did was being collected on our campus, and nobody was doing anything with that data. And I just thought, that's crazy. And so even back then, I said that we need to think about studies across courses and disciplines and institutions. So we can learn things about how students learn, so we can help more students and be talking about that with each other. So that what I learned in Michigan isn't just for Michigan and about Michigan, but maybe help learners elsewhere. Okay, so this is how we got to where we are in Michigan today, and there are a number of key pieces here that it tends to be I would say necessary but not sufficient. So the first starting point is this integrated student data warehouse. At Michigan, when I started doing learning analytics, the LMS data lived in one place, and the admissions data lived in one place. So all the things we know about a student when they're coming in, you know, what high school they went to, what grades they got in high school, their parents' income, all that kind of information lived in the admissions office. And then the data about what classes were they taking, what grades did they have, that lived over in the registrar's office. And for lots of reasons that weren't because of my needs, the university decided to integrate all those data sets and put them in one place. And that turns out to be very helpful and make it easier to do to get at the data, right? There were a number of individual faculty projects going on, like my own, but we started to discover each other. Somebody would say, you should meet my colleague Tim McKay. You should meet Tim McKay. He's in physics. And you know, he's been pulling data from his course to think about how he can teach his physics students better. And so there were just these individual faculty projects that people were going along, trying out their own ideas about what they thought might or might not help. And what happened was, my one colleague and I put together a proposal to hold a symposium on campus. And we just met once or twice a month, and we gave talks, and people came from everywhere. We started with just a small group of people, and then the reach started going wider, including people from our IT department, administrators, and so forth. And so we kind of generated this groundswell of interest around this topic where people had different touchstones to it and started thinking about how learning analytics might affect what they were trying to do on campus. Then one of the best things that can happen, of course, is money. Right, so our provost, our university provost, who's pretty much the top of the heap at our institution, said, I think this learning analytics thing is really interesting. I think it could be very valuable to the university. Here's some money. Go do some good work. And so that was very helpful. And then we created this Office of Academic Innovation. The provost, again, had the foresight to say, and create a vice provost for academic innovation. So here's a unit on campus whose goal is to think about innovating teaching and learning. And then we have a new data science institute that's only a couple of years old. And learning analytics is one of the key areas for this data science institute. There are 4, soon to be 6, and learning analytics is one of them. And this was important too, because I think that people don't necessarily think about learning analytics as a data science. And I guess that's just because people have been doing data science before learning analytics, and you've got statisticians and health informatics people and so forth who think that they're all about data science, but of course educational data is a form of data science too, right? And the other thing then at Michigan, we've hosted the Summer Institute for a couple of years. So you can see it was really, things were happening at the bottom, but they got blessed at the top, and that allowed more things to happen at the bottom and more people to get involved. And so that was really very nice way in the culture of my university to have something like this grow in the way that it did. And when we started the Learning Analytics Task Force, we had some goals. And the first one was to do research, right? We didn't want to just be waving our hands and telling people how great it was. We wanted them to see data and to see what the data could do. And we wanted to be a test bed for investigating student learning. So we think of our whole campus as a laboratory. Every student who comes into our university is part of our laboratory. At the same time, we work hard to protect student privacy. So we have involved our Human Subjects Committee, our Privacy Committee, our Office of General Counsel, work very closely with all of these bodies on our campus to make sure that everybody's comfortable with the fact that we're collecting a lot of data about students and they're not giving individual consent. So we don't give them a list of, here's all the data the university knows about you, which ones don't you want us to use? We use what we need to use because we're still figuring out what we need, right? And what's important, and the students have come to understand, I think, if they think about it at all, that we're doing this in service of providing them with a better education, which is really the philosophy that our university has, is that we really have an ethical obligation to utilize this data to help students, because our business is teaching. Business is students learning. And so we need to do what we should do to make them all more successful. And then finally, too, we're always thinking about value and scalability. So what does it do for the university, and can it scale? Can it go from a little experiment that one physics instructor has been playing with in his class to something that can be used by the whole university? And I'm going to give you some examples of that we've done that. So when I said we know a lot about students on our campus, this is a whole list of things where we gather data from students. So of course, our LMS here, Speed Tools was our Sakai product, and now we're with Instructors Canvas. We've just moved over. But we also have data from all these other places. Some classes that have lecture capture, so we can have data from, in a culture, it is another video lecture capture tool. But the same way we can know things about admissions, human resources and payroll. If a student has a job on campus, we might know how many hours a week they work. So there's a large amount of data that we have access to for our research on our campus. And one of the nice things that's happened in the couple of years since we've been doing learning analytics is we created this data architecture. So understanding that more and more people were wanting to do research with the data, our institution set up this learning analytics data architecture. So this is a place that you apply to get access to the data that you need, and then you have to present your case, and you have to say what you're going to do with it and how you're going to protect the privacy and so forth. But it's a kind of institutional mechanism for getting access to the data, the student data warehouse. So how do we take these things at Michigan and scale them up? And basically, as I suggested earlier, we start with small things. Usually, research teams test them, but then we want to move them to bigger things if they're really providing value to the campus as a whole. And one of the other nice things that we've done we have in our Office of Academic Innovation this thing called the Digital Innovation Greenhouse, which is an in-house staff of software developers and designers. So I can take a tool and I'll give you an example of something that I developed in my lab, and I kind of made it work basically on a computer sitting under somebody's desk. We couldn't possibly scale that up to the whole university, so we handed over to these, you saw this DIG group, and they do real software design and make sure that it can run at the scale that it needs to run to be scalable across the university. So I'm going to give you 3 examples of 3 tools that have been developed on my campus that follow this model. Basically, they're tools that individual faculty members thought of and wanted to collect data on and do research on. And they're at different levels, focused in different ways. So let me start here with academic advisors. So on our campus, students go to see academic advisors to ask things about what class should I take, and if I want to be this major, what set of courses do I need to do, as well as I'm not doing so well in my course, what can I do to improve, how can I help? And we found that academic advisors felt that they were discovering too late when students were in trouble. And they came to us and said, can you help us? Can you use the data that's in C-Tools, the Sakai program, to sort of figure out when students are getting in trouble? And this was just about the time when dashboards were becoming popular. Purdue University in the US developed something called course signals. And so we really modeled it after course signals in a lot of ways. We developed it specifically So it looked like they needed it to look. And it pulled data in real time from the LMS. And we had an algorithm we developed that helped calculate when students were going to be in trouble or almost in trouble. And it started just with 4 academic advisors in one program. Now there's more than 67 advisors, which doesn't sound like a big number on a campus our size, but some of these advisors advise potentially thousands of students, and they don't even know their names, right? But so it's scaled up, and it's one of the key tools that's being used to help understand when students are struggling. So here's what it looks like. So if you're an academic advisor, you have a list of students that you're responsible for. And of course, their names and their student ID numbers are blocked out here, so to protect the privacy from this screen dump. And each box is a course that the student is enrolled in. And if the student's doing well in that course, there's just a little green check mark. They're doing well. If they're potentially going to be in trouble soon in this course, they're kind of not doing as well as they could be, then it looks yellow. And if they're really performing in the bottom quartile students for the class, it gives you this red signal. And so the advisor can look at a glance and see which students they need to call to come in to see, right? So like, and these gray boxes are courses that the student may be taking that either isn't using this advisor program or hasn't collected enough data yet to produce a signal for it. So as an advisor then, you can start to prioritize students you want to see. Like this student, you probably want to see pretty quickly, right? Because only one of their classes are they on solid ground in, as opposed to some other class students where they're doing just fine. And here's a curious case where a student's doing well in all these other courses except one. So what's going on in that course and how can you help this student change that trajectory for that course? So then the academic advisor can say, okay, so what's going on with the student? So they call up the student's name, and this tells them exactly which course the student is enrolled in. Here's a student that's in a computer science class, a math class. This is the lab section for the math, a physics class, and a stats class. And they're really not doing very well in their computer science class or their math class. They're on iffy status in stats, but they're doing okay in physics. And it shows them the status, but it also shows them, so how bad is this CS performance? Well, there's the course average, and that's where the student is. So you can see the student's quite a bit below the course average. In this math class, they're still below the average, but not quite as drastically below, and so forth. And even in this class, which is green, you can still see that they're slightly below the course mean. So it gives you a nice quick visualization of which classes the student is in and how they're actually doing. And then you can drill down even further. So you can pick a specific course and you can say, so what's going on in this course? Well, here's a week-by-week analysis of the student's performance against the course performance, the average in the class. And here, this is too small to read, but each is an individual graded assignment. So the advisor can get successively more and more detail about the student because that's the information that they felt they needed so that when the student comes to see them, they can be very specific about where they see those problems. And we investigated a number of different research questions around this. We wanted to know how advisors were using it. Did it affect student performance? And we had some very early results that showed that on average, the students in these initial 4 advisors who were using it were doing better, and the advisors were picking up their problems sooner, and the students' average grades were rising. And the other thing we wanted to know that we're working more on is one of the things we found out was, well, we designed this dashboard specifically for academic advisors. But as we were studying their use, we realized that sometimes the advisor would call the student into their office and they'd turn the dashboard around and show it to the student, right? And say, look, here's what I'm seeing here. Here's what you're doing or not doing. So I'm going to come back around to this question in a minute about student-facing dashboard. And our experience with this advisor one helped us think about what we might do for students. My colleague Tim McKay, who I've mentioned before, has a program that he's developed that's specifically supporting students, and he calls it eCoach. And he had this idea from some of our faculty colleagues in public health department school, who were using a coaching system for health intervention behaviors. So if you're diabetic, or you're trying to quit smoking, or you're trying to lose weight, this was a tailored messaging program that would send you little messages that say things like, you know, you had a big lunch today, but remember, if you want to lose weight, you have to have fewer calories for dinner tonight then, or those kinds of things. And he wondered, could I use it for students? Could I do messaging interventions for students the way these public health people were using it for health problems? And so he did a lot of work to figure out what to say and how to say it. And he went to other students from his past class, and said, you know, what would you tell a student who is in this position in the class at this point in time to help them, you know, figure out what they should do next? So it was very much designed with input from students. And it's being, again, scaled up to be used more broadly on our campus. And it remains to be seen, you know, how many students are going to use it. But it kind of looks like this. It has some information for the students and a little message system, and there's some topics. This is just, and they can click on it if they're using it. This is the information from their statistics course, their computer science course, or their honors course that will get the data from each course individually. And it does things like this. So here again is feedback information. So here it says you made it through the first statistics exam. You scored 63 out of 75 points, or 84%, which is a B+. And then it shows you the course distribution. And here is the student's grade. And they can see how many students got a grade higher than them, and how many got lower, and basically how the distribution looks for the grades in their class. There are a number of other visualizations in the program. I don't have time to show them all, but again, he had some research questions that he was investigating around this. And the top one is, can we take this health behavior intervention and use it for learning? And then what are some important features of that feedback? And finally, the last one I want to talk about is a tool that another colleague of mine developed to help support faculty in their teaching. So this is Barry Fishman and his just got her PhD a couple months ago, Katie Holman, and they developed this tool called Gradecraft, which is a gameful learning management system. People have heard of gamified. They've rejected that term because they like this term gameful, and basically their bottom line question is, how can we make school more like a better game, right? And so they think of it as a learning management system, but there are a couple of things that they've really radically redesigned in this system, and that gives the students more autonomy over what they're doing in class. So it's based on a theory in learning theory, self-determination, that really talks about students feeling a sense of competence, belongingness, and autonomy. And so they thought about design elements of good grades, good games, and some of the characteristics are like in a good game you can earn up, right? You can go up. You can decide how you're going to play the game, what you're going to do next. Freedom to fail. We don't give students the freedom to fail very often in higher education. If they fail an exam or homework, that's it. You know, there's no way to change that. And also, they don't often know exactly how well they're doing. So their system looks like this. Again, it's complicated. You can't see a lot of detail, but across the bottom is a calendar week by week, and it shows them assignments that are coming up that are possibilities for them to do. Because what it does is it simply turns the course into a number of points, right? And you know at the beginning of the course how many points you need to earn an A, how many points to earn a B, and so forth. And then it gives you a lot of choices about how you can earn those points. And it tells you exactly how many you can do, and then where you are. And it actually lets the students use these sliders to predict. So in other words, I might say, here's something that's due the same day for this course as a really big important exam in one of my other courses. Now I have to decide, where am I going to invest my effort? And the student can say, well, what happens if I decide I'm not going to do that assignment and I get 0 points? Can I still earn enough other points from some of the other activities that I can still end up with the grade that I want? So that's that kind of freedom to fail aspect here. And the autonomy is that they get to make choices about how they're going to earn the grade that they did. Now, it's hard work for instructors, because if you think about a class, you write one midterm exam, one final exam maybe, and maybe some homeworks or other quizzes in between. But if you're teaching in a gameful way, you have to say, well, what are other ways that the students can demonstrate that they know that knowledge? And how can I craft assignments that allow them a different way to show whether they know that? So maybe instead of writing a term paper, you give them an option to write some blog posts, right? Or these reading quizzes, maybe they hate quizzes. And there's only a certain number of points, and if they don't want to do any reading quizzes, then they have other options about how they can earn those points. And you've created them in such a way that you feel confident as an instructor that, well, if they can show me they learned it this way, then I don't need to read their reading quizzes. And so basically, at every point in the semester, the student gets pretty concrete feedback about for each individual thing, how they're doing. And again, this is familiar, how many of the students did this particular thing, what's the grade distribution, and so forth. So it's constantly giving the students feedback about how they're doing in the course. And then here's some of the research questions that they're still exploring with the use of this gameful approach. They have taken this kind of commercialized, but it is available. It's a very low cost for this system, and they're anxious to have other people try it. And so I've included the website down here that also is a much better explanation about gameful learning and their philosophies behind it. And we're still investigating some of these questions about how does this change the students' strategies for being learners, right, and especially being more successful learners. And so last, I want to tell you a little bit about the work that I'm doing right now. As I said, I designed that dashboard for advisors and found out more and more that they maybe wanted to turn them into students. And you saw from the examples that I gave you that there are lots of systems that are putting dashboards, student-facing dashboards in the system. Blackboard, I know some of you use Blackboard. There's a student-facing dashboard in Blackboard. And people are doing this because there's just this general belief that giving a student a dashboard will support metacognition and help them to be better self-regulated learners. Okay, that's a good idea, but there are 2 recent review articles that have come out that looked at these dashboard studies, the ones that are out there. And for example, this paper reviewed 93 studies that had some kind of mechanism for providing data directly to students about their performance. Of those 93 studies, none said how they did the visualization design. 6% actually reported that they did a needs analysis. 11% did any kind of usability testing. And of those who actually looked to see did using the dashboard affect the student behavior, only 16% of them. So there's a lot that we're assuming about dashboards. There are a lot of people building them. Everybody wants a dashboard for their students, but we actually don't know very much about how those are affecting students. And so I'm really concerned about this because I want to know, can students interpret this information? How do they, and do they know what to do with it? If you tell them that their grade is this much below the class average, that doesn't tell them how to fix it, right? That doesn't tell them what they're doing differently than other students. And with this idea about personalized learning, we don't have any idea about what students, when presented with this information, think, oh my gosh, I got to work harder. And how many of them think, I'll never be able to pass this class. I might as well stop handing things in, right? We just don't know. So, I showed you, these are just examples of these kinds of dashboards that already exist. And there are lots of different, you can see there's lots of different visualization styles and so forth. But, and this is the one in Dashboard. I did a little work with the Dashboard company before they rolled this out. And here's again the distribution, and here's the student, and here's the rest of the class. And this was a dashboard that we then did some research on. And this was actually put into Canvas. And this shows the student for assignments, where they are, and there's the class distribution. Again, the line across the top. Some other things, and this just, I mean, these are just typical visualizations that these systems have for students. So what I did was, I studied the use of that dashboard in 2 different courses. They could use it through the whole semester, and then when the semester was over, I surveyed them at the end of the course about with questions about their use of the dashboard, and then of course we collected the log data. When they were hitting the dashboard, opening it and taking a look or not. And we're really interested in viewing preferences, right? Do they like this comparative feedback information, or do they just want to know how they're doing? And does the use of the dashboard have any relationship to how they're doing in the class? And what are the differences between students if you're underperforming or at the class norm? So this is very early days for this dashboard study. We haven't actually analyzed the log data yet, but we know from the self-reports survey at the end that basically, so this is a scale of 0 to 4 about importance. So we asked them, how important was it to view your own performance? Somewhere between important and very important. And this is pretty consistent. This is the undergraduate students, and these are students in our master's program. How important was viewing your own performance relative to the class average? 3.25, 3.29, so that's, most people said very important, and a couple people thought it was extremely important. Resulted in me feeling more positive about my performance in the course. This is a lower number, somewhat important. A little bit better for the master students. So in general, what we found is that, first of all, there was a pretty low frequency of opening the dashboard over the course of the term for these students, and there are several explanations for that, I think. One is that it was a brand new thing, and it was only available in the one class. It was, in the first study, the undergrad study, it was located in the toolbar down under the, they had to scroll down to find it. They forgot it was there, basically. And just, you could see quickly from the visualization, it wasn't really giving them great information, right? But they did like this idea of comparative performance information, which I was really curious about. And they generally reported a positive effect on their performance, or that, that they liked knowing it. So the conclusions I have so far is that they found it informative by and large. They liked it, and they expressed some interest in having it available to them. If you ask them, you know, would you like to have this for all your classes, and they said yes. But at least in the 2 short studies that we did, they didn't actually go there and look at it this much. So what we're doing now is we're building a new dashboard, starting from scratch. I have a great team who is working on this. I have people from our IT department, so I know exactly what data I can get out of Canvas. I have a colleague from my school whose specialty is information visualization. I have another colleague from our School of Ed who knows about motivation. So we're working together all summer to create a prototype for a dashboard that we'll try out in the fall with some students, and it will be integrated into the Canvas structure and hopefully a little more visible, a little more obvious for use. So I'm running out of time, but I want to leave you with some questions about things that we can do now. And I don't mean just we at Michigan, I mean we as learning analytics people. We can build models, we can design personalized learning trajectories, and we can create interfaces for advisors and students and faculty to make this data visible. So it's real to them, and it gives them some sense of what they can do when they understand better what's going on. And I want to leave you with this idea about information agency. So you can give the data directly to them, right? Faculty, students, advisors, and let them know what to do with it. Or you can only give the data to experts and let them tell everybody else what to do. Or you can make sure that the data that you have is available to everybody. And then you can have experts help interpret the data, which of course is a position that I like. Where do we need to go? And this is a chart that I'll leave you with. Can we use institutional data to innovate teaching and learning? That's really the point. Can we get there? Can we develop new models for effective instruction and fair assessment? Can we create shared data sets with ultimately the goal cross-institutional? Because I can do what my students are doing at Michigan, but I don't know that that's typical of students everywhere. Students in my college, as I said, it's pretty competitive at entry. They're generally good students. If I design tools that work for my students, I want to know, do they work for a different kind of student? And for which, and how, and under what circumstances? But the cross-institutional one will be the trickiest, given issues about data privacy and so forth. And last, I want to point out that when we do analytics, we are at risk of exposing things that do and don't work, right? You're going to use this data and you're going to be able to say, even this instructor is not doing as good a job as that instructor, or we have a lot of difficulty with our gateway courses. Our students are not doing very well in the gateway courses. And some of our students are really doing poorly. What do we do about that? Because as I said, it's not just finding the patterns, but figuring out what to do with those patterns. And there's a whole set of ethical questions about learning analytics views that I think I will not have time to discuss, but certainly need to know that we're thinking about them very deeply. And leave you with that. So it's 5:01, so there you go. Thank you.